And I think that that's a great life corollary too, because if you're looking like 10 moves ahead, well, you make plans and God laughs. There's so many chances that you're not going to get to the 10th move, right? That your opponent's going to, some kind of circumstances, something's going to change. So in reality, I think that kind of idea of thinking about the options rather than obsessing over a clear plan that you have to follow to a T is another thing that you learn from chess.
Hi, it's Runchuks. The following is our conversation with Jennifer Shahade. She is a two-time US Women's Chess Champion. She's a PokerStars ambassador. She's also an author, speaker, and the host of The Grid, which is a great podcast. It received the award for the best poker podcast this year, and I highly recommend you check it out. This was a wide-ranging conversation. We started off by discussing Netflix series The Queen's Gambit and what made it click for the wider audience. We talked about how the games like chess and poker mold us, what we learn from these games, and what makes them beautiful. We also get into the behind the scenes of Jennifer's own podcast, talk about the underlying idea and where she's going with it. And of course, there is much more. Timestamps are in the description, so you can jump around the topics if you want to. And now, I hope you'll enjoy this conversation with Jennifer Shahade. Jennifer, welcome to the show. It's such a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to have a nice long conversation.
Right, the long conversation. That's pretty much what the show is all about. I recorded earlier this week, I recorded a 4-hour conversation with David Sklansky. So
wow.
I think we're not going to go 4 hours today, but a long conversation is indeed on the menu. I guess, you know what, let's start with the most logical place to start a conversation. Let's talk about The Queen's Gambit, the new Netflix series, and we'll see where that leads us. Because I know you've been talking about it on the social media, and to be honest, that was the reason why I started watching it. Because I saw your messages on Twitter, and you were giving a lot of high praise to the series. And I thought, well, you know what? We have a conversation coming up. I want to check out what's that movie about. And so, thank you, first of all, because it's great, really enjoyable. I finished 4 episodes so far. Really looking forward to the rest. But what a movie! What a series! What are your thoughts about it when it came out? And I suppose you watched the whole thing, right?
Yeah, I did. I didn't expect it to be, I had heard about it for a while. I got a call from a casting director for like some advice on, how to cast the young Beth. So I'd known about it, and there's a great Chess Life magazine story about it that I got a preview for. I was in touch with Netflix. So I knew that all about this, but I did not have any idea how incredibly good it was going to be, and therefore what a big impact it was going to have on chess. And also, I think the timing was really good, bizarrely enough. You would think that releasing a series like the week before the most pivotal election of our lifetime would be like an error because everybody is super distracted. But in a way, I think it's like the opposite, that people were craving something really absorbing so that they could maybe stop checking their phone and updating like vote counts for maybe like 1 hour, or even a half hour, right? So interestingly enough, like I think that actually worked in its favor. And it's definitely created this mini chess boom, which is actually on the heels of another chess boom because of like streaming and online chess during the pandemic. But this is kind of like the other side of it, like the glamorous side, the travel, and the over the board, the beautiful, majestic chess pieces that is kind of like a constrained sculpture. So that's like an art in itself. It's like all these different layers of art in the series. And I think that is why it's so perfect, that it's giving you this imagination of luxury and glamour. And on top of that, right now, it's really easy to go online and check out tons of resources about chess. So we're really attacking it from both angles. I loved it. I gave it I think it's almost perfect, honestly. And, whenever I see something or read something that's almost perfect, I think it's kind of my personality that I'm just a little fixated on the 1 or 2 things that I feel like resist perfection. because it's like almost even more frustrating when something is that good and they just like make like one or two mistakes. Not mistakes in terms of like technical stuff, more just like in my view, mistakes that could have made it even more of a masterpiece. But I try to kind of like keep that away from Twitter because it's really easy when you criticize things on Twitter and you actually really like them for it to get taken out of context. Like I've noticed that Twitter is very difficult for certain types of conversations and nuance. It's really good for some, but it's not good for nuance. It's great for wit and for training yourself to like, speak in very clear and concise sentences, but it's bad for nuance. So, I mean, the great things about it were from a feminist perspective, you got this view of a woman who was totally self-possessed and was completely absorbed in her passion. And even though she was, of course, beautiful and perfectly dressed with perfect makeup, she was ultimately more engrossed in the world of the mind. And in fact, just totally in flow. And that's just a great, I think, image of, female beauty that we don't usually get to see. And the other thing I really liked about it was the chess accuracy, which I think verged on the point of, a secondary masterpiece. So like the series itself was so brilliant, but then like there was this structure of chess games that were mostly designed by Bruce Pandolfini and especially for like the climactic matches and games by Garry Kasparov. And it was so much work put into that kind of secondary text, which ends up being like this bunch of Easter eggs for people who really love chess. So those two things, and then also the avoidance of cliches. I mean, I'm very much involved in like creativity in chess, and I love the game. I've been playing since I was a little girl, but I was just astounded by so many of the cliches that they managed to avoid, like the fact that they don't do close-ups on the queen and like show you Beth as like the mini queen, for instance. I mean, that's fantastic that they avoided that. They avoided other cliches too, like the idea of a chess player as somebody who just like thinks many, many, many moves ahead. They show you that to some extent, but it's not like the focus. And I really thought all of that was very powerful. Also, the idea of the man as the person in the supportive role. They avoided the cliche of like the Russian villain. That was great, right? So, I really thought there were so many great things about it that were so fresh and so perfect for this time.
Right. And even when we were saying about the cliches and how they avoided it, I really loved the moment. And I guess we're going to give a few spoilers to the audience, but so be it. There won't be huge spoilers, but there was this moment where she was interviewed by Life magazine or some magazine, and the journalists were asking all sorts of journalistic questions like, oh, are you losing yourself in the depth of the field or whatever, some crap like this. And she just looked at the journalist and said, no, it's just the board, it's just pieces, right? Which goes to show there's no, which would be an easy route for movie makers to go into, this romantic idea of, I'm so in love with the pieces, so in love with the game. It's not the game, not the board that matters. It's what you do with it. It's the intellectual pursuit of the whole thing.
Yeah, it's like a miniature world. Sure. I like that as well.
What do you think? How did this happen, first of all? Because it's so surprising. You said yourself, like, the timing seems impeccable. First of all, they came up with a movie on top of already one boom that is happening. Why is chess all of a sudden, well, pretty much mainstream in some ways?
Well, I think it's just a lot of things coming together. Chess is a very inexpensive game. It's international. Twitch and chess.com and chess24 are all kind of committed to making it as popular as possible. Then there's also been the St. Louis Chess Club in the United States, who's kind of been pushing it like crazy for like 10 years before this boom even can't happen, but started planting the seeds. So yeah, I think it's a lot of that. And, it's a good example of the power of competition, because that's like all that competition is making the sites work harder to, promote the game, I think. And that easy level of entry that anybody can just like sign up for an online account and start playing and practicing. And the games are pretty fast. And you've got like glamorous chess stars like Magnus Carlsen. And, in streaming, you have these big personalities that kids are now looking up to, whether it's like the Botez sisters or Hikaru Nakamura. And I think that all of the different factors kind of coming together, even before Queen's Gambit, were, really, really powerful, especially for this time with people stuck at home. Chess is like a perfect activity to, pass the days.
What do you think, for you personally, were some of the biggest lessons you learned from chess?
Well, I think one thing you learn from chess is that you can communicate with everyone, regardless of where they're from, how old they are. That ability of chess to cut through the boundaries that we often see, I think is really a powerful aspect of the game. I was traveling when I was, 15, 16, all the way through college to, dozens of countries to play chess. And the people that I met that were from such different backgrounds, but I could connect with over the board, was a tremendous networking experience, as well as just like a nourishing experience, I think, for your soul. So that, I think, is a number one lesson. Number two is that you can experience flow through chess in a very pure way. And even if you don't become a chess champion or a chess professional, you can kind of try to, pocket that feeling and try to recall it later, or try to model it later in whatever you're doing that you love. So making sure that you feel that type of absorption where you're not thinking about anything because you're so involved in what you're doing. And there's other things too. I mean, like, I guess a big one for me, I try to think ones that aren't obvious. And another big one for me is that so much of success is thinking about all the different possibilities, not thinking super far ahead. I think that a lot of non-chess players think of chess as something where you're looking 5 to 10 moves ahead, 20 moves ahead. But actually the most difficult part, and this is just, a math thing, is that it's looking 2 moves ahead, but 10 different possibilities, right? Like, that's harder. So, and I think that that's a great life corollary too, because if you're looking like 10 moves ahead, well, you make plans and God laughs. There's so many chances that you're not going to get to the 10th move, right? That your opponent's going to, some kind of circumstances, something's going to change. So in reality, I think that kind of idea of thinking about the options rather than obsessing over a clear plan that you have to follow to a T is another thing that you learn from chess. And that's why, when you start playing chess, the most important tactic is the double attack. Doing 2 things at once, forgetting that your opponent can do 2 things at once to you, finding a way. And for those of you who don't play chess, it's like, I'm attacking your queen and I'm attacking your rook. And you only get to make 1 move at a time. So yeah, I'm going to win one of them, and unless you have a double defense. So that's like another thing. But as you get stronger and stronger, double attack always remains integral. But the more important tactic that you notice even the top grandmasters in the world missing is what we call an in-between move, also known as a Zwischenzug, which is the German word for it. Intermediate move, it's also called sometimes. And that's like, you have this clear plan, like I take your bishop, you take it back, but somehow there's like a move that's sliced in there that you forgot about because you were just like automating. Like, you forgot that when you took their bishop, they could just throw in a weird check that doesn't look like it's any good. Well, this is called an in-between move, and there's a Zwischenzug, and it's one of the most important concepts in chess, and because people miss it at all levels. And that's, again, an example of tunnel vision. You're thinking, but you're not thinking about all the different possibilities. So yeah, that's a really good example of, I think, different things you can learn from the game.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up the in-between move, because I noticed myself, I'm not by any stretch imagination, I'm not a very good chess player. I'm okay. The longer the time limit, the better I become. Much like maybe with the conversations, but put me in a bullet game. I really, and to be honest, I shouldn't be playing bullet. It's not really chess. It's just pure waste of time. But the in between move, I believe that the lower your understanding of chess, the less likely you appreciate the beauty and find these moves. Just because it's always, as you said, the tunnel vision. When you're sort of a beginner or intermediate player without that much experience, you're sort of focusing, okay, we're attacking, let's attack. We're defending, we defend. But to think that there's a bigger picture here, there is a need for this in-between move to stabilize things, to put good solid foundation. That is not an easy thing to do.
No, it's not easy at all to see them, and that's why they're missed at all levels of chess. I think somebody wrote once, maybe it was Jonathan Rousing, who's a great chess player and philosopher as well. He wrote about how an in-between move was like a joke, and I think that's a really good analogy. That it's something unexpected, that in that, because so many jokes are structured in that way that you're like, it starts with like what I would say like a rook exchange, and then you're expecting for you to take the rook back, and instead it's something totally different. And that is where you see like the joke in chess. It's like these in between moves where it's like, whoa, where did that come from? I wasn't expecting that. And so in that way, maybe chess can make people funnier. Certainly the world champion is quite funny. I think he's blessed with it. I think like he was born with it, because in press conferences and stuff, he's just always finding some kind of like witty response. Magnus Carlsen, that is.
Yeah, he does. And Grishuk is another funny guy.
He is. I think it's in a slightly different way, though. He's more of like a character.
It's a very different.
Yeah.
But and you know what? Actually, I was thinking about this question myself today. The question of what does chess teach us about life, and what do games in general teach us, right? Because we learn a lot from poker, we learn a lot from chess, but there are some things that you can only learn from chess and can't learn from poker, and vice versa. So I'm curious to see your comparison. But first, I just want to me, the biggest thing from chess is learning how to lose. Basically, from the early, as a beginner, you're bound to lose, and lose in such a way where you don't have an excuse. You lose in Monopoly, you can always blame it on the dice. You lose in whatever, always that one. Well, there was a chance involved there. There's no chance in chess. You lose because you clearly were not good enough. Then comes a time when you hit the realization, you know what? I made everything perfectly. I did every move the best I could, and I still lose. And then that realization of, well, maybe I just don't know enough. Maybe there's more. And in the movie, for example, that moment where she had the game, her first big game against Belkin or
Beltic
against Beltic, she won it. And after the game, she was talking with her mother and saying, well, I'm going over the moves, looking for weaknesses in my own play, and I don't see any. And then in the next episode, she meets somewhere in Cincinnati or whatever. She meets this guy with a cowboy hat who's this very good player, Benny. And he just casually said, oh, you know what, you made a mistake there. And sort of the whole house of cards collapsed on her, because she realized that, you know what, even though I poured over that game over and over again, and I really believe that there's not a single weakness, in fact, I should have lost the game. And to me, that's beautiful, because that's one thing that we really learn from chess, which is hard to learn from anywhere else. So first of all, you learn to win and get back at it and continue. You learn to take responsibility, and you learn to understand that there's more. Just because at this current moment you think you know everything and you did everything right, might not be the case.
Yeah, always more to learn for sure. And a lot to learn from both your losses and your wins. Yeah, that's an important concept. I've talked about that for many years, that, in chess, a lot of people focus about how you can learn from your losses, but you can also learn from your wins. And that for people who are particularly haunted by a loss, a specific loss, it's good to know that you still need to work on your game when you're winning. And I think that obviously that's something for poker players as well. So I think that one is a corollary between chess and poker. But yeah, I agree with you. Learning to lose is very psychologically difficult in chess. And, you're dealt so many bitter disappointments in both chess and poker. And because we create these miniature worlds where chess and poker are basically like life, it interests me that when you do poorly or you play poorly and you do poorly, that convergence, of course, is always the worst. And afterwards, it almost feels like a miniature death. And, I wouldn't want to cheapen death and actual human tragedy, but that's the way the games are modeled, that they are a miniature world in that, you are feeling like you're almost like a bad person if you play badly until you leave that bubble. Right. And then you realize, okay, there's actually a real world in which, like, I'm not a bad person because I played badly. Right. Or I'm not a great person because I played well. And that can be very difficult for kids, though, to understand that, or even for grownups. It can be difficult to kind of understand that that's the whole point. That's why we do them. Because if you are in this miniature world and you're able to behave with integrity, when there's so much on the line in the miniature world, then that might mean you're going to act that way in the real world as well. And if you don't, you can work on yourself in a field where it's not really life or death. It just feels like that for a few minutes.
Jennifer, do you think that losing in chess and losing in poker are really all that similar?
They could be, yeah. I think so. I mean, a little different, but I think the difference is, I think they have a lot of similarities. But it's because in poker, at least for me, they have a lot of similarities for me, because in poker, I am usually not that upset if I lose, if I played well. So I'm usually only upset about bad decisions. And particularly, what's difficult about poker is that sometimes it's not obvious that you made a bad decision. So for players who don't want to get any better, that's great, because they don't have to worry about it. For players who do want to get better, that can sometimes be difficult, because you don't even know whether or not to feel bad at first, because you're not sure whether it was a good or a bad decision. So it's a little bit like almost like a psychological torture, that you're just like, going through a hand in your head, like, did I play that well? And you maybe later you'll use a solver to assess it, but in the game, you can't do that. And even if you use a solver, you don't, if you're talking about a live game, it's not like 100% clear that's going to give you the applicable results. So it's different in poker because of that, because it's more difficult to really assess whether you played badly or not. But if you played badly, like you don't even need to check. It's like obvious, right? For whatever reason, it's like obvious that it was like a horrible play. Then it's very similar to chess, I think. Yeah, I think it's similar.
Interesting, because I never thought about it this way. To me, these two experiences are quite different. There are similarities, but I'll tell you what I find different. In chess, you're exposed. The moves are on the board. Everybody knows your move. The set look, everything is set out there for everyone to see. You can't pretend. How many times have you seen somebody like, what did you fold? Oh, I folded like I had nothing. Where in fact you folded like the second nuts because you somehow thought it's a good play, and then you are um, ashamed to admit it and hide behind that, right? In chess, you can't hide behind anything. You are just exposed, and you have to live with it. You have to live with taking full responsibility for your actions, and either you face the truth and try to improve, or you don't. But you can't hide behind this mask of, oh, you didn't know my cards. Whereas in chess, there's that hurdle. And I agree that for the top players, there's really no difference, because the top players would approach both games without fooling themselves. In poker, you wouldn't want to find false justification for why your play is good if you clearly think that it might have not been good. You're gonna go and study. But then again, even with the studies, if we take a game of chess, you can come to a pretty definitive answer. Whereas in poker, you always have this little option of saying, oh, yeah, you know what, but I don't believe that my opponent would play these ranges that way. I don't believe that this applies to my case. So there's always so many possibilities for excuses in a game of poker.
Yeah, definitely. There are a lot of possible excuses, but there's also the possibility for like even more pain in poker sometimes than in chess, because you can converge bad play with bad results, and that's like the worst. That's where people that's the most emotionally difficult of all, right? And it's possible in chess too, because sometimes you're playing for high stakes in chess, so you play a bad game and it actually costs you money, but it's way rare because so many chess tournaments are not like, they don't have these top heavy structures that poker does. A lot of the time it's more flat, where you get your expenses paid for and all that. So plenty of similarities and differences. I think from the poker point of view, the biggest difference is because money is such an integral part of almost every aspect of our lives, and how we live them and what choices we get to make. It's much less abstract of a game than chess. So chess, it's like you're entering this new world where two people enter the world for a few hours, if it's a classical game, and then come out of it together. In poker, it's much more of like a mirror and a model for like the real world, and like the types of financial decisions and like, weaknesses in your desires and fears might be, or, strengths.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that for me is the reason that I also like poker, even though like as a game, maybe I prefer chess, but as a model for like how you can improve your thinking about money and like psychology and negotiation, poker is the best, right?
Mm.
And I mean, I know you've had Maria Konnikova on your podcast, so I think that she writes about that a lot as well, and think that it's great for people to kind of understand that. Like I just read a book called The Psychology of Money, and that was really good. It was pretty short, but very interesting. And of course, you kind of feel a lot of poker lessons that intersect with basic financial lessons.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. It's interesting though that, and I agree with you. Poker is a perfect sort of playground for improving the other important decision-making processes in our life, right? Because, like you said, it's less abstract. We're actually dealing with money, etc., etc. At the same time, at some point, it becomes healthy or healthier, a better approach to decouple the chip value from the actual money, because, otherwise it's pretty stressful, and that's probably not a good idea. At least most of the top players that I know have made the distinction very, very clear. When they're playing, they're actually not thinking in terms of, this was a house, this was a car, Oh, I just made a mistake, I misclicked, and that cost me a car. That's a bad way to think about it. But if we come back to, because you've mentioned, and I liked the way you put it, the mini universe, the mini world of poker, or a mini world of chess. In general, like if we think about it, chess players, the ones that really go for the top, it's such a commitment. It's crazy hours, so much work, and same applies to poker. So we basically get away from the conventional path of, you finish your education, you continue on the path of education, you in the same career, you changed your job every 5 years, etc., etc. So basically something completely different. We all claim that it teaches us something about life, but then again, our life is pretty different from a conventional. What do you think about that? Like, even watching this movie, seeing Beth being obsessed with the tournaments, and basically the tournaments, the competition, that's the life, that's the aspiration, that's what we're going for. How do you feel about it yourself?
You mean about the privilege of being able to like play games and how like that not everybody has that luxury?
Well, that's great that you started with the privilege, because not everybody sees it as a privilege. Some see it as a curse. So I'm curious, like, how do you see it yourself, that you basically were able to, well, play games for a living, and commit yourself to mastery of the games that you love?
Well, I definitely think it's a privilege. I mean, you get to set your own schedule and there's a lot of fascinating people that you get to meet. Yeah, maybe sometimes people could become overly, get stuck, maybe become overly obsessed, but then not as obsessed anymore, but already feel like because they are so good at something, they're stuck. I
Mhm.
notice that a lot in both chess and poker players, that there's a lot of complaints about that they maybe got really good at the game when they were young. And then they just started getting like, sweet deals to like play in tournaments and give lessons and make some easier money. And then they, neglect their education or other types of opportunities and later kind of regret it because, they get bored or something, or the money is not as good, whatever the reason is. So yeah,
Mhm.
that's really hard because, of course, you can recognize that you're very lucky and privileged and still be unhappy, right? that I think that's like a kind of distinction to make. Like just because you're fortunate doesn't mean that you're going to also be happy. Maybe by framing it as such and meditating on it, like it will, increase your happiness, but not necessarily, right? And so, yeah, I think you just engagement and flow is really important. And so getting stuck in a rut and doing the same thing over and over again is hard for anyone. I mean,
Mhm.
that's like, I think the curse in some ways of like increasing specialization, right? That um, people are not robots and they get bored.
Mhm.
So, they like to be challenged and constantly engaged. And yeah, I totally know what you mean. I can see both sides there. I guess I think I'm pretty lucky right now, especially that my both of a lot of my passions seem to be like more respected than they've ever been. In the case of chess, and not only like chess itself, but also like the work I do in chess to promote it to girls and women. Like, people might see it as like kind of like a worthy, noble side project. But now like it's actually like, no, people are like really interested in that like feminine side of, brilliance. And so it seems like it kind of like lifts up some of the stuff that I've just been doing for so long, right?
Mhm.
Like in the pandemic, I'm doing all these like chess classes for girls. And now we're also expanding to like women's classes. And we've been so lucky. I mean, we even had Garry Kasparov speak to our group last week
Oh, wow.
about the Queen's Gambit, which
Mm.
was really astonishing. Yeah, he spoke to a group of girls and some women as well about why he decided to take that project on and what he thought it meant for women in chess and why he picked some of the games he did and analyzed them. So yeah, that was really special. And it means a lot to me, these classes, because I think that it's a difficult time for people, and the ability to connect with each other over like a fun game. It's really taught me a lot about education, actually. Like, education is not my main thing, but I'm always involved in it. Like, as both somebody who raises money for education, as somebody who does a lot of presentations at schools and events. So and even in poker, I used to make videos for One at Once, and I'm also just kind of constantly fascinated about like the pedagogy around poker. So yeah, this whole experience really taught me a lot about that, about, educating young people and how to meet the challenges of these times where we have to like do it online.
Is that conversation with Mr. Kasparov available somewhere, or was it?
Yeah, well, I actually just looked at the final edit, so it's definitely going to be up by the time this video is up. So maybe you can put it in the show notes or something.
Definitely put it in the show notes. I'm sure a lot of people would love to hear from Garry himself, especially talking about the movie, which he clearly did a fantastic job. Like you said, the Pandolfini seems to have done the bulk of the work, but Kasparov definitely put the final seal on the most important.
I think Pandolfini did a lot of work training the actors also to like look like chess players, which sounds a lot easier than it is. Very difficult, because the movement of the pieces with your hands, like, I mean, the hand is like such a complicated, thing. And so, the exact way that you hold the pieces, move it, glide it based on how many moves it's going to go. It seems like so second nature to chess players, but actually apparently to teach actors, it's really hard. The lead actress in Queen's Gambit was Anya Taylor-Joy, was originally a dancer. And that makes perfect sense, because she was able to be super attuned to like the very minute choreography in the hand. And I love when I heard that, because I have a friend who's a great dancer and an artist, Gabrielle Revlock. And like about 10 years ago, we did a project called Hula Chess, where she taught me how to hula hoop and I taught her how to play chess. And we combined the two in this like art installation that my now husband, created with me. And I was blown away by how quickly she was able to look like a real chess player, even though, she didn't know how to play. I mean, she knew, basically I taught her the moves, but she didn't know any strategy. But like looking at her making the moves, she just like caught on like that, because she's a choreographer and like a modern dancer. And like, that's what they do. They're looking for like the tiny, tiny things that you do that, make it into like a real chess master moving a rock. So yeah, that I think Bruce did a lot of that work. At least it seemed that way from the conversation. The director was there as well. But what Garry did was, I think very genius. And I've done a little bit of this in little projects that I've done over the years. So I was like super fascinated to hear this. What he did was he took like some basically vague references in the book by Walter Tevis, The Queen's Gambit. So they would say like, there was a queen sacrifice at the end. There was a pawn push before adjournment. So he would take that and he'd kind of compile that. There'd be like maybe 3 key points, like the opening, a pawn push in the middle, and like a queen sacrifice at the end. And then he'd like try to do a database search with his like team and like narrow down the types of games between grandmasters that would be good fit for the series. And then once they did that, they would often improve upon the game for the series, because now it was Beth Harmon playing the game. And, she was even better than the grandmasters in the game texts, especially, with a little AI in the 2020. So that's amazing, the work that went into that. And then I think what it really shows is that also the creator, Scott Frank, had tremendous faith in Garry and Bruce. And it's not just having people like Garry and Bruce. It's like somebody really giving a fuck that they're there. Like really. And of course, I mean, it's Garry, so it's not that surprising, but the fact that they were able to get him and they actually like, hung on his on his every word and really executed it, I think is kind of like a model for other creators that if you're going to get experts, you should listen to them.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
I guess Dr. Fauci would like to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of experts, actually, now, just hypothetically, if somebody were to make another poker movie, right? It's been a while since we had I don't even know what's the last good poker movie. It has to be Molly's Game.
No, oh yeah, Molly's Game. Molly's
Yeah.
Game was good, and then there
That
was
was good.
especially the first half. I love the first half,
Mm.
and then there was Mississippi Grind. I thought, which was really good too. It wasn't very famous, but that was
I haven't
very
seen
good.
that one.
Yeah, you should check it out. Good stuff. It did really badly, but sometimes things just don't get much marketing. But it was really good. Kind of been similar in chess. We had a movie a few years ago called, maybe it's been 6 years now, Queen of Catway. Stunning, amazing movie, but also
Okay.
just didn't get a wide enough release. Almost perfect reviews, but never got that like kind of buzz treatment.
So who do you think could be the advisor for a poker movie? Who can be the Garry Kasparov of the poker world? Because most of the poker movies, when you watch the poker scenes, you roll your eyes and think like, well, okay, yeah.
I guess it depends. See, the thing is, it seems like, I always knew that, Gary's written a lot of books, right? So it's like it shouldn't be shocking that he's like a creative genius as well. But he clearly was. Like when you hear him talk about it, like you really see that side. Because chess is also creative. So like it kind of makes sense. But I think that's what you need. You need somebody who's like kind of like both really a poker legend, but also has like a creative genius to them. I would think somebody like Nick Schulman might be good, especially if mixed games are involved, since he can kind of do any game, and he's also very creative. And then it depends. Like if it's more of an online thing, you might want somebody who also has like a great history in that. Who would you think of?
I wasn't even thinking about online at all because it's hard to imagine how can somebody make an appealing movie about an online poker.
True.
player,
So
right?
you're thinking about like,
Probably
thinking about
like
live
the
poker.
live. Yeah. I don't even know. Like if I had to choose one, I'd probably pick Ben Lamb just because I like the guy. I think he would go for the special hands. He wouldn't go for the obvious, like the cliche kind of things. I don't know. I mean, maybe.
Yeah.
But Nick Schulman definitely as well. But yeah, it's funny. I hope that if somebody makes a movie, they actually do ask some of the top players to contribute, because it's always a shame to see an otherwise perfectly great movie to end up with a pretty mediocre poker hand when both players are supposed to be top class.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Usually it doesn't bother me that much. I think Mississippi Grind was pretty good on that, but I have to rewatch it, and I don't know who consulted for it, but I feel like that one was pretty good. Yeah. As for what it would be about, I posted a question about that on my Twitter some time ago. There's so many options. Generally, I think somebody mentioned like a Phil Ivey biopic, which I thought was a pretty good idea. I think that was maybe one of my poll options.
Mm-hmm.
And the UB scandal.
Have to be appealing to the wider audience?
I think it would be, yeah. You'd obviously, maybe you would embellish things a little bit. I guess it depends on like kind of how exactly true to life everything has to be.
Right.
But yeah. This was fiction, The Queen's Gambit, but it was pretty loyal to the book in a lot of ways. I thought it was funny in a way that they were so loyal to the book but it made, it was amazing. So I guess that worked out. But yeah, usually they seem to like change things more, right?
Right.
Well, you probably haven't read the book, but I'm also doing a book club with adult women chess players, because I guess one problem you have with grown-up chess players is that most people don't really have a time to get like way, way better. Like they could get better like over like a year or something, doing a lot of puzzles and some training. But there's some people who like want to be part of the culture of chess without like, just like studying tactics and openings 3 hours a day, right? So this is why we formed this like Mad Women's Book Club. The idea is that there's all these women out there who want to be part of the chess culture, especially after seeing the Queen's Gambit, but don't necessarily want to like study chess all the time because they have, families and lives and jobs. So we've gotten tremendous interest in it. So I'm like really excited. It seems like we kind of hit a nerve. And I wonder about how, poker can kind of tap into that as well. People who are interested in being part of the poker culture, but don't want to like, use solvers and study all the time.
Yeah, it's a tough one. And also then we always get back to the money aspect, right? It's all of a sudden no longer something you do for fun every Friday night with your fellow chess club members. You actually have some money at stake, and for some families that it's another issue immediately.
Yeah. Yeah, poker's expensive. I mean, I think people forget that like there's so much of especially in the United States, there's so many people who are just getting by, even with like, incredible work ethic.
Yeah.
And, that kind of like squeezing of the middle class is also a squeeze on the amount of people who can have disposable income to play poker, especially live poker. Yeah. And, and online poker, that's probably one of my favorite things about it is that it's much more inclusive in that anyone can play at any level. Not any level, but you can get in for like, playing for a couple bucks, even much less. Can't do that in a live casino, which is totally understandable because, somebody needs to pay the dealers and keep the lights on. But it is, I think that there is that just barrier to entry. And even then I like to call it like the poor man's finance, because you can go into poker with a few $100 and still get a lot of like lessons, whether it's like online or live. Whereas like it'd be much harder to get those lessons, like trying to like get into finance. But that's actually a misnomer. It's actually like the, person with disposable income is financial courts, right? But not as much. So, I think that's a great point. And it's always something to be conscious of. That's why like I get so kind of exhausted by like the women in poker debates that sometimes pop up, because to me it's just like so narrow. The questions are always about like, important things like harassment of women at the tables and like sexism, verbal sexism and all that. And, underestimating of women. Like it's usually always wrapped around those issues, which I don't think those are unimportant issues. But like, if you're actually talking about why don't more women play, then you need to look at the fact that most women are too busy to play because so much of childcare and, housework and emotional labor is put on them. And they also have less wealth than men, and they also make less money per dollar than men. So it's like all of those things are just like these massive structural things that are just looking us in the face. And it's like, oh yeah, but like, she got, somebody didn't think she was capable of bluffing there. Like that's so insulting. And yeah, okay, like which one is really stopping women from playing poker? It's like a little bit of a red herring effect.
Yeah, that's right. But if we think about chess, right? Because you're saying right now a lot of women are trying to get into chess and get into the chess culture, as you said. First of all, I don't even know what's my question here. It's just, to me, it's interesting that there is the divide to begin with in a game like chess. I understand why, perhaps culturally, historically, but you're in the midst of all that. Maybe tell me about how you see this. First of all, the divide, that we always talk about, women's chess, men's chess. It's always kind of separate. It's chess. We're not talking about boxing, right? So what's going
everybody
on
plays with the same board and pieces, and usually play in the same tournaments. So that but that's very difficult for like the mainstream to understand. If they hear about like a women's chess event, they kind of get very instinctively upset because they're like, oh, why is there a separate women's chess tournament? But okay, in reality, usually women play against other men because mostly men comprise in the world. So there are special tournaments and events that are just for women, and particularly ones for girls, which people just play because they like them. I mean, I don't think there's any like, complicated psychobabble to this. Like, there might be a little bit, but the primary reason that people play in them is because they like them. But I think that because there's so much gaslighting of female and like the woman in our culture, and it's all like kind of passive aggressive and under the table. It's not all. Some of it is quite overt, but a lot of it, because it's less acceptable maybe than in previous eras to be overtly sexist. A lot of things are just kind of like gaslighting and subtle. And like one of those is just like extreme negativity towards things that our women are doing, and like a kind of like not even intentional, like a subconscious, unintentional slighting of women. Like, for instance, like suppose a girl just won a women's chess championship or something. Like if your first question is, why are there separate girls tournaments? Like, that's a little like interesting that you frame it that way, because you could also ask the person, why do girls enjoy playing in tournaments together so much? But like we always want to phrase things negatively about women and girls in these fields because we think that there's a problem. Well, what's the problem? They want to play with each other sometimes, and usually they want to play with men, and everybody has a different caliber. Some people don't want to play in any female tournaments, and that's completely valid. Some people mostly want to play in them because that's their safe and fun space, and they like making girlfriends at tournaments. So like I just wish people would like understand that whenever they frame a question, it's a kind of like polls. The way you frame a question is so relevant to the answer that you're going to get, and that the way that you look at the world, regardless of what answer you get.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a key point that you mentioned here, which is so often overlooked, that the chess club or your local poker club or your golf club, it's a social event. So you form it with the people, the like-minded people that you want to be with, right? And if it happens to be that you want a specific setting, because even it doesn't have to be chess or poker. We can even talk about, let's say, martial arts, right? Some people really want to go to a gym where they want to compete for a high level, and that's it. Let's go. And if there's no blood, it's been a bad training session, right? But some people just want to do it for fun, to hang out, get in shape, So that's the divide, and it's beautiful that apparently this movie is inspiring people to go and seek out this chess culture that appeals to them. It's great. Do you think something like this can happen to poker?
You mean another boom based on like some kind of like intellectual depiction of it?
Well, actually, let's step back here and think about it. Was it what is it about this movie? The intellectual depiction of it?
The
Or because it's
glamour.
such a weird movie, right? Because I mean, first of all, she's not what you think of like as a chess player, right? Because of her behavior, because of her, the way of life. It's not a stereotypical chess player. Doesn't mean that she's a rare breed, and but it's not a stereotypical depiction of a chess player or what it means to be a chess player. Yet it's so appealing.
Yeah, I mean, would something like a great new poker movie be or series? Yeah, there's never really been a poker series.
Yeah,
I know Matt Salzberg was working on one for a while. I think he wrote about it publicly, but that was a few years ago. I believe it was maybe even before Black Friday that he was working on it, or maybe right after. But yeah, it's interesting that there's never been like a series about poker. That would be great if there was a series that you could like really follow the characters.
Absolutely. Because if you think about it, part of what makes the Queen's Gambit so interesting is the story that the stuff is happening there. There is drama, there's action, there's weird things going on, and you can feel for the main character, and you can despise her in some aspects. There's emotions. It has the whole thing. With poker, you don't even need to make that much up to depict a story of this sort. Somebody playing all sorts of games, going through all sorts of adventures, which are, just combine a few stories that are out there from things that actually happened. Put them into a movie might be interesting. But is it as interesting because it's almost real? Would it be as interesting because it's almost real? Because
I think it's just a big challenge. I mean, I don't think it's trivial. Like, think about the fact that like they assembled this incredible team, got Netflix behind it, probably had a big budget for a series, I would imagine. I mean, it looked glorious. I know they filmed it in Berlin. And so obviously, I don't know how the industry works, but I'm assuming that the people that they brought to the table were so impressive that a lot of money was released because they assumed it would do well or could do well. So I think that's actually probably like very unlikely. Like that doesn't happen a lot with any type of series or movie, I think. Like I mentioned, a couple other great movies, Queen of Catway, Mississippi Grind. They clearly did not have that marketing, treatment for whatever reason. And a lot of series don't get that marketing treatment. So A, you need that. B, you need it to it was based on a book that was written, a long time ago that really helped inform the script. And then you just need all these stars aligning. So I just think it's not like, obviously, if somebody could write a poker series as good as that, it would be happening right now because there'd be so much money to be made, right? not regardless of the poker boom, just from the people making it, right? That they would want to. I think it's just bloody hard, right? To have all those elements come together, because otherwise, why are there so many series and movies that aren't like 5 stars, that are like 4 stars or something? Nobody set out to make them 4 stars, right? Or less. It's something happened in the way that was unexpected, some kind of series of failures, or I don't even say failure because that's too strong a word. But it does seem like our culture is definitely very polarized with like the content that we get, that if something is like very, very good, excellent, and has good marketing, it just goes bananas and gets into everybody's house. But a lot of things that are just the tier below that are very, very good, but not, as A, great, and B, as well marketed, just never just like kind of like explode. And I always find that a little sad. It seems like the social media algorithms are just like very fixated on like what the trends are. And if you write about something that's not trendy, like it's just not going to kind of get going. So they have a lot of power, and it tends to create like this power law where the great content and the well supported and well marketed content becomes more and more and more popular, and it's just kind of like almost like a cutting out of the middle class. So that's why, when things are left unchecked, you're going to have like super, super mega popular stuff, and you're not going to have a lot in between. And in the case of the Queen's Gambit, it's so good, and it's about my beloved game, so I'm not really complaining. But at the same time, you got to understand there's very few slots. There's not a lot of slots for that type of success. So will poker get there one day? I think it will get there again, but who knows when.
Yeah, and who knows in what light? I mean, I don't even know. Because also, if you think about it, Molly's game, the cast, I mean, come on. Idris Elba, Jessica
Chastain, yeah.
Yeah. Those two already. And then the rest of it's just incredible. And I don't think it was hugely successful. It had reasonable success as a movie, but even not a lot of poker players haven't watched it. A lot of my friends, I've told them about the movie. They're like, nah, never watched it. And it's actually based on true story.
I liked it, but it was more about like it was more glamorizing like the entrepreneurial spirit of Molly, not the game itself. So I'm not
Yeah.
surprised it didn't create any kind of poker boom because
Oh
I
yeah,
felt
I'm
like
not
it wasn't really
surprised
about
about that
poker. I
either.
felt like it was about the business behind private games more.
Yeah, yeah.
Poker was more incidental to the plot. Like Molly didn't play poker, right?
Hmm.
So the hero of the story didn't even play poker. It's like in the Queen's Gambit, if she was like the organizer of the, or the inventor of a new type of chess, not the actual chess player. It's very different, right?
Mm. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Jennifer, you know what? You said nobody sets out to make a bad movie. Nobody sets out to become a bad chess player or a bad poker player either. Let's talk about this a bit, right? Because somebody who commits their life, and with chess usually, because that's a big difference in poker and chess. I mean, poker players, some get into the game in their teens, most get right around 18 years old or later when it's actually legal to play poker for money. With chess, you get into it, a vast majority of top players, they got into it really young. And that's basically their life. And yet, if we think about it, how do we measure success in chess? Because the elite group of players, the people that we've mentioned already today, right? Like the world champion, like Grishchuk, like let's say the whole top 20 and then some. It's just a tiny fraction of the whole population of people playing chess. What do you think? Like, what happens there? Because I happen to know a lot of people who went into chess, played junior championships, quit to go into careers and attribute much of their success in life to that early days of chess. The lessons that the game taught them and what they gained from it and the experiences, etc., etc., etc. And yet there are some who seem to drag their chess career into their mid 20s, 30s, get really bored with the game, never achieve anything, and sort of a wasted opportunity of doing something else. How do you look at that?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Because some people, I guess it just depends what the options are. Because for some people, chess is a great way to make a decent living and explore the world. For some people, you're right, it could be a distraction from getting like, an education in some other field and becoming even more successful. So yeah, it's a really tough question because it's so individualized. But you're right. It can both enhance a career and make somebody way more successful than they would have imagined, whether it's in chess or something else, or it could, distract someone and be like an addiction that will prevent them
Hmm.
from being as successful as they could be. I think it can definitely work both ways. You're right about that. It's a tough question. I think that, but the good thing of it is, I think that the more popular chess gets, the easier it will be for people to like escape it if they want to, because chess can become even more of a calling card and a networking tool.
Hmm.
So if somebody is tired of playing chess, ironically, by chess getting more popular, they might be able to transition more easily into something else just because they're going to meet more people, more successful people. So yeah, I think you see that in poker too, that it's like this networking tool. And sometimes people meet people in finance and or sports betting, and they end up like, working with them on something else. And you'll start to see that more in chess now, I think, as it becomes more mainstream. So that'll be good for those people who feel stuck. They'll be
Hmm.
able to kind of like branch out a little more easily. But yeah, I think that I wrote recently that what if chess were about what you can how much I wrote recently, what if chess were more about how much you enhance your life with chess than how good you got at it. And I think that's really important because if you use chess to make your life better, then maybe you're the one who's a good chess player, not the person
Hmm.
who is obsessive, gets a little bit better, but somehow like frays into other aspects of their life and makes themselves less happy. So yeah, you just got to like monitor yourself because, you want to be like happy and satisfied. And, more than anything, I think that what's important is the feeling of growth. I think that's one of the most important human feelings. Like I I've struggled with growth in recent years, and sometimes when you haven't grown for a while in terms of like either whether it's in any whether it's money or like, fitness or success or skill level at chess, poker, whatever you're doing. Like there's so many different ways to grow. But if for some reason you're like striking out in all of them at once, that's a very bad place to be because then you might forget what it's like to experience growth. And then you get used to it. And that's terrible. You're kind of like used to like not growing. And it's like, well, no wonder, like I don't think people should play Blitz online if they're not studying chess actively. They can if they want to, just for fun. But I think in most part, people are not going to enjoy it. I think it'll be a net neutral, which is bad because then it's an opportunity cost if you're not studying at all. Because you're going to lose as many games as you win, and you're not going to learn anything. And I just don't think that feels good for most people. But maybe I'm just extrapolating on my own experience. I'm not totally sure about that, but I would say that the key to anything you're doing is your own personal growth and monitoring whether you have it in some aspect of your life.
And what about balance? Achieving balance in life, because so often we see it with poker and we see it with chess, that this pursuit for growth, for improvement, for perfection consumes everything. And then that's the sole focus.
Yeah, that's hard. I mean, I think you have to think about balance in terms of your lifespan, not just each day. So I think that's a point that often gets overlooked. And maybe people are more aware of it with this pandemic because people are stuck at home. So you can see this stage of life as being, much more about, family, meditation, growth in certain aspects. Now, some people have a lot of financial problems during this time, so they might not really have time to reflect on any of that. But for people who are lucky enough to, have either, social welfare or, good careers even during these times, it, might get earmarked in your life as this time for a specific type of growth. And yet there might be other times where you're just like traveling all the time and networking and expanding that area. So yeah, I guess that would be one thing I would encourage people to think about with balance, to think about it in terms of like a year or a life, not just a day. Like a day doesn't have to be balanced, right? But a life should be.
Yeah. And also, I think a trap that a lot of poker players and chess players fall into is that eventually you just play the game because you play the game. It's what you do. I'm a chess player. I'm a poker player. And there's no self-questioning as to, is there something else I should be doing? Is there something else I'd rather do? Because then it's like a sunk cost thing. Oh, well, but I invested 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years of my life into this pursuit. What else is there? Am I really going to put everything aside? And, for a human for majority of us to actually just turn the page and say, well, you know what, that sunk cost, it was an investment, it wasn't the cost, so let's just move on. It's such a hard step to make. It's one of the things I admire about Vladimir Kramnik, how he retired, when he realized, you know what, I'm not enjoying it as much as I used to. It's time to move on.
Yeah, and I think the work that he did with Alpha Zero was remarkable. But yeah, that's the thing. And I think that obviously it has a lot to do with genius and talent as well as work ethic. But it's like one of the great things about being super successful is that it allows you for more options and balance later in your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, there's a lot of cliches about that, to like work hard now so you can like, relax later. I can't remember how they're all phrased, but there's so many of them. But yeah, like if you see people like Garry Kasparov also, who retired at a very young age and
Oh yeah.
decided to devote himself to politics and, human rights and writing and general promotion. Like I feel like it'd be hard to do that if you weren't super successful. Like that's the whole point. And like, so people like when people like Kramnik and Garry and Judith Polgar retire, everyone is like, not me, but a lot of people in the chess world are, devastated and upset. I don't see it that way. Although I have to admit, Judith was tough because, she was the only woman to play at the highest level tournaments and we haven't been able to replace her. But I also feel like it very much makes sense too that people would want to leverage this like incredible career they had into their own personal fulfillment and happiness, not just to repeat being really good at chess or epically good really for the rest of us. So I think it's in some ways, I think it's like happy when people do that because there's so much inertia to make you not quit something. So I feel like if somebody has that courage and desire, it almost is great because it means that there's some kind of force inside of them that's pushing themselves to something that's great. And yeah, that's a good thing.
Absolutely. My hope is that more people look up to these examples for inspiration.
Yeah, although it's like it's hard because you can look up to it for inspiration, but there's so many people who don't feel like they have that privilege because first of all, it doesn't even matter how much money you have if you have like such a legacy and reputation, like you're just going to do fine with whatever you do with names as big as that, right?
Yeah.
And on top of that, their earnings are probably really high because of their successful careers. But I think the type of person you're talking about earlier is like a poker or chess player who has had a good career but not a great career, so might not have the privilege to just like quit and figure it out, right, or follow their passion, as you say. So I think that maybe for role models you got to look at people who did it but did it at a different point, who at a different point where they were like successful but not mega successful.
Yeah, right. But you see, that's one of the problems for somebody who is reasonably successful or thereabouts, and they feel like they're not in a position to quit because they didn't achieve it yet. That's the paradox, right? Because then they like you don't really want to go for it and achieve it, and yet you don't really want to stop and move on, right? And that's such a paradox, such a
I see what you're saying. Yeah, if it's not about money, if it's just about that psychological fulfillment, what I was talking about is just on a practical level.
yeah.
That some people
But
might just be stuck because they're making money from these fields, and like they just don't know exactly how to make that somewhere else.
yeah, I find it hard to believe though that people who are actually making money in chess and poker would struggle. I mean, on emotional level, for sure, they would struggle. Like the first time you have to put on a tie and a suit, that's already a first step. And then obviously all the other aspects. But, people who make money in these careers are very bright people. So I wouldn't be too worried about. I wouldn't be too worried
Maybe,
about money.
yeah, maybe you're right. I don't know. I'm
On
not
emotional
sure.
level, it's definitely a hard one. Right? But we've seen it over and over again. People in the States, the Black Friday happened. A lot of people moved on quite successfully. It was forced upon them, but you know. Anyway, let's get into another topic which I'm very curious about. You teach chess. When somebody comes to you as a novice, as a beginner, let's say nowadays, somebody comes and says, "Do you know what? I've seen this wonderful movie, The Queen's Gambit, inspired me to explore chess, see if I like it." How do you make them see the beauty of the game?
To be honest, I give very few private lessons because I'm just way too busy right now. But I do enjoy it occasionally. Like sometimes I do give lessons for charity events as prizes. And then I do have a couple of students, but just squeezed into my schedule. And I have my group lessons with my girls. So that's where I kind of do my like teaching and education program is via my girls and women programming, which is, just part of my work at US Chess. And I think that I try to put my world view of chess into that, which is that I want people to be passionate about the game. So there's a lot of advanced material, but I also periodically try to do content that is geared towards a different type of brain, like creativity. We had like a creativity workshop in chess with this amazing singer and songwriter Huga, so where they had to kind of like come up with like different song ideas based on chess. I did like college and chess workshops where people talk about like how to write essays for college based on like your chess career and like balancing chess and college, and things like that. Where we do a Kenya and U.S. chess girls meet through chess initiative where they like teach each other about each other's culture, and then they also play chess. And one time they were teaching us the pieces in Swahili, and in Spanish also we do that. So that's kind of like my mission through that. And I hope that I'm so busy just kind of like in the weeds and the thick of it right now. But eventually I'd really want to like kind of create a presentation of all this about like all these life skills and all this overlap. And maybe it will have an influence on other people about how to use like a beautiful game like chess to inspire people of all different types of ambition levels in chess. I know that some of the girls in my class want to be great champions, and some of them want to get into a better college. Some of them just want to socialize with a great group of girls while playing a game that they like. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways that people go to it. But my goal is to figure out how I can reach like the maximum number of people and keep all of them interested and engaged at the same time. And there's a point at which it's no longer possible, right? Like if I have, a chess master and a total beginner in the same group, some presentations might work, but some won't. But I think people would be surprised at how much if you're creative and engaging and energetic, how much you can connect people. And yeah, you just have to think about somebody new to chess who's watching this. Think about what do you want to get from it? Like what is your goal? Do you want to understand the beauty of the game that like Beth Harmon in Queen's Gambit says that chess can be beautiful? Or do you want to beat your brother or your sister? Do you want to get a certain rating? Do you want to understand the history of the game and how that connects with the history of the world or the history of your country? Because anytime you take a small subject like chess and you study its history, you find incredible things about general history that you wouldn't have learned otherwise. It's like this reference point. That's why like studying art history is so great, because it gives students a way, like something to like kind of fixate on as they're watching the centuries and decades pass by. Chess is the same way, that it just gives you this like steady constant so that you're not overwhelmed, right? So yeah, I think that all that is my approach to chess education.
What makes chess beautiful?
There's a lot of interesting theories about that. I gave a lecture on that actually. Well, there's a couple of theories that, first of all, aesthetically, from the surface level, the pieces themselves are beautiful and they're used by many artists to explore the constraints of beauty in the 8x8 board and the different pieces. So sometimes people use like abstract objects to represent the pawns and the king and the queen and the bishops, knights, and rooks. And sometimes people just try to carve really beautiful knights and use really beautiful wood and colors. So there's all sorts of different perspectives on that. Many great artists of our time have created chess sets. So that's kind of like superficial beauty. And I don't mean superficial as an insult. I mean it as like surface level, because it's the pieces themselves. But then there's also the beauty of a chess move, like a chess game. And there's a couple different theories for that. Like one theory is that chess moves are beautiful for like a few different criteria. One being like depth. So, how deep is the move? Like, how many moves ahead is it? How difficult is it to see? One is one big one, which I think a lot of people associate with chess beauty, is paradox. So something that's like very surprising is often considered beautiful because it's shocking. And I think that when you get truth that is also shocking, that gives you like a sliver of beauty, right? Like you feel that feels beautiful. So for instance, a queen sacrifice that ends with like a smothered mate, it's difficult to see, and yet it's true because it leads to checkmate, and that's truth in chess, leading to checkmate, right? So because of that, you get this feeling of, chess beauty. And then the other one is like geometry. And by the way, somebody put this in a book called Secrets of Spectacular Chess. So these categories were like described and delineated there. I read that when I was a girl, actually. I was really influenced by that because I was never the sharpest, quickest person, but like this kind of opened up my eyes to another side of chess.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever you get as absorbed in something like that, you're just going to get really good. And the fourth one is flow, which is a little harder to define, but means kind of like the sequence of moves relate well to each other, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So geometry, flow, paradox, depth. Those are the four categories. And I think that maybe some of those overlap a little bit. So maybe this is not the absolute perfect framework, but I do love the idea of like kind of creating a framework. So you can say like, why is that beautiful? And try to describe it to someone, even if they're not like the best chess player or even play it that much.
Mm. What do you think in terms of, especially if we think about, well, the paradox, okay, it's much more obvious, but I'm just thinking the understanding of the beauty of the game has to be also a function of the level of the player. Because if you're not good enough to see the beauty, there is no beauty.
Right. Right. I agree with that. But you can maybe kind of break it down to somebody, and maybe it could entice people to get better so that they can understand that, because it doesn't require, it depends on the position. I mean, there's a lot of beautiful chess problems that aren't that
Absolutely.
hard. And I think that's why we talked about four categories. Depth is the one that like corresponds most to difficulty. But
Mm-hmm.
like paradox and flow and geometry are not that correlated with difficulty. They're correlated a little bit, but not a lot. So,
Mm-hmm.
like the beautiful checkmate with a smothered mate that, everybody learns when they're starting out, where you have a knight on h6 and you play queen g8, rook takes g8, knight f7 mate. Like that is like one of the most beautiful things in chess. Like full stop. Doesn't matter if you're the best player in the world or a completely new player. Like even the best player in the world still thinks that's beautiful. Like it doesn't change, even though it's really, really freaking easy for them. Because they had, even a lot of amateur players have that pattern memorized, so it's easy for them as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it's easy, but it's still beautiful. So that's nice that there are some things there that you don't have to be like in insane chess champion to get from. Like the ready problem is another example, because I figure a lot of people watching this probably know chess, so they can like look up the ready problem and the Saavedra. Those two, man, those are great. I like to show those to beginners because even like a beginner can understand both of those, but not too beginner. Like they should have been playing chess for like a couple months and
Right.
like definitely know about like en passant and castling, and maybe know a little bit about like how to checkmate with the queen, something like that. Like they could be playing chess for like 2-3 months and you could show them both of those extraordinary positions.
Mm. It's very interesting. I've never heard about the concept of these four categories for evaluating the beauty of chess, and makes so much sense. And I know from personal experience, the first aha moment when you realize just how beautiful this can be was a big drive for me to start or keep improving. When you realize that there's aesthetics to this, there's the beauty. Do you think pursuit of a beautiful game is a productive quality, a good quality to have for a chess player?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it correlates very strongly with success. Now, sometimes it becomes a problem, and you see this with a lot of great players, but usually not the greatest. You see this with a lot of great players. They love chess and they love the beauty of the game. They get into a lot of time pressure. So
Hmm.
sometimes there's a negative correlation between being a good practical player and being in love with the game. And I think you can see that in poker as well. That people sometimes are, obsessed with making correct decisions, and therefore, and maybe they love equilibrium play, and they find that, beautiful. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but you see what I'm saying. There is some correlation that practical
Absolutely. Yeah.
play, I think, it comes more easily to poker players than chess players, but it is incredibly important to success. And sometimes it's hard. It's hard for
Mm.
people to be like, I love this position and I'm fascinated by it, but I need to make a decision in 2 minutes because it's not important enough to justify. That is a very difficult thing for somebody who comes from a more artistic point of view to do. Like, that was me. I found that very hard. If I was fascinated by a position, I wanted to keep looking at it,
Hmm.
And it's funny because my brother is a great poker player and a great chess player. And he said he's gone through stages of interest in both games. Like, he played online poker for many years, was a, well-known 2+2 poster and sit and go theorist. But for a while he was doing both. He was doing poker and chess. And he told me that one of the things he noticed when he came back to chess after like a long time in poker was how much more practical he was. And so, like, that example I gave about, like, this is a fascinating position, but if I make a decision here 2 minutes, I'm going to have an hour left for the rest of the game where the real critical decisions are going to be. He said he was just much sharper with making those types of decisions. And I thought that was really interesting. And that's how, like,
Mm.
that poker career helped him with chess.
Mm. And it's also such a great lesson for life that both games sort of force on us that this need to make the decisions within a specific allocated time frame.
That's right, that you have to make a decision. Not making a decision is a decision. My friend Nell is a decision coach, actually.
Okay.
And she's also a writer. So she's an author and a decision coach. And that is one of her very prominent lines, which I feel like is also something that Maria Konnikova has written about, Annie Duke's
Hmm.
written about. That, you have to realize that not deciding something is deciding. And if you think of things that way, then you can become much more decisive and deliberate about your life rather than
Right.
just kind of like floating along,
Right.
going with the flow.
And even from like the very practical perspective, from within the games, right? As you said, in some positions it makes no sense to invest more than 2 minutes into the decision. And in poker, I feel like, and I see it with a lot of my students and people in general that I talk poker with, because of the solvers, because of the abundance information that we have nowadays, people seem to forget. Well, a lot of people, let's put it this way, a lot of people seem to forget that you still only have a few seconds for that decision. So whatever information you're trying to gather from the solvers and the depth of knowledge you're trying to get out of it, are you going to be able to apply it in those 2-3 seconds? And memorization, especially in my game in Potlim Damaha, memorization is not really a thing. You're not capable of remembering so many things. So distilling ideas into the very basic, the core principles, the first principles, so to say, that should be the pursuit. That's your task when you're studying. Whereas we sort of decouple actual game from the study process. A lot of people seem to do it and just go really deep, but you don't have enough time.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I mean, I think like whenever I used to use solvers, I would always have like a Google Doc or Notepad open where I would like write, because I felt like if I didn't write things, it was just completely impossible to retain any patterns. And most of the great players I've had on my podcast, Grade, kind of like echo that it's all about pattern recognition, not memorization. Whether it's like, Chris Kroc or Dan DeVoris or Michael Acevedo, it seems like it's a pattern that comes up again and again. I mean, a line that comes up again and again that you shouldn't try too hard to memorize things. Maybe pre-flop ranges, but because that is like a more constrained set of things to memorize.
Because that's something that there are clear boundaries to it. It's not an infinite pool of information. You just basically, that's it. Memorize that. And for Hold'em, how hard is it really, right? For PLO, it's slightly more difficult, but
even then, like if it's just opening range, I guess if it's just like literally opening ranges, but if it's also like 3-bet ranges and defending ranges, then you have to account for all the different sizes. So technically that could be nearly infinite
technically,
too.
It's still not that difficult. I mean, if that's your livelihood, if that's your career, you can't even go as far as memorize those things, then, come on.
Right? Well, yeah,
and
maybe,
I don't mean like to perfection. Not
that's
that
what I mean.
Somebody's
Okay,
going to test you on that. That oh no, you said this hand you're opening 100%, but it's in fact only 85% of the time.
Exactly.
Get out of here, right?
Yeah.
But,
yeah. I definitely see what you're saying, and in that way, I feel like poker has a corollary to chess in that like the end game and the opening are the two poles of the game that you can memorize. In poker, of course, the end game would only be applicable to, short stacking or, ICM and late tournament shoving and calling off, right? So that would be like the stuff you can memorize at the end, and the stuff you can memorize at the beginning is the opening ranges, and everything else in between is like kind of unmemorizable, but it's all about patterns. And it's not that you can't memorize any of them, but that it's because it's unrealistic, it's very difficult and you might misapply. And that's one thing that I think Michael made a lot of good points about. Like, sure, you could probably memorize a strategy on certain flops, but then like, what are you going to do with that information when the flop is slightly different? There's a good chance you're going to try to extrapolate the one that you memorized and you're going to be wrong. Now, if you're disciplined enough not to do that, then there's no harm in it. But it seems like that's a hard thing for a human to do. And I've seen that in chess too, that I've had students who memorize an opening really well, and then there's like a slight variation in what their opponent plays, and they try to do the same thing that they did against the other opening. And it's like, dude, if you just use your own brain, you would do better. Like you're trying to use what you memorize so that you don't waste what you memorize. But actually it's so sad because you're actually like sabotaging yourself by studying. That's the worst of all worlds. You put the work in and it made you play worse. That really sucks. So like, just don't do that.
Right. But obviously the problem is the fault in the decision-making process. Because instead of thinking through, going through the principles of why am I doing this, you're just following the book, which in chess, clearly, that's why we have variations, because somebody figured out the counter tactic to that standard line, for example. And that's why these things exist. And in chess, it's so easy to see how important the end game is. Maybe the most important thing in the whole game, unless you're really outclassed in the middle game. Usually, being a better player in the end game is going to give you an advantage. In poker, my belief it's the same, yet what is the end game is not as obvious.
Right. There are two ways to look at it, right? Like if you're an MTT player, you could look at it as like ICM and shoving ranges, but you could also look at it as the river. So they're both reasonable corollaries to make.
Absolutely. I agree with that. Especially like if you think about just the simplest idea of the river, right? Because the ICM, that's a specific for a specific tournament, like structure, etc., etc. But the river is the river in the tournaments, in the sit and goes, in the cash games. It's just the river, and that should inform your decisions on the flop and the turn. Because, like you said earlier, like what do you do if you just memorize all your ranges or all your strategy for a specific flop? What if the flop is slightly different? But to go even further, what if that's exactly that flop? But did you actually memorize all the possible turn card combinations, all the possible river card combinations? What are you going to do then? Right. So you're making it's the same thing as following the opening line, arriving in the middle game and being completely lost because you don't know what you were trying to achieve. You don't even know what position you were going for. What's your play now?
I agree with you. And I think that the river is a really useful street to think of in chess-like terms, because you're right. It's like, it might seem like if you're studying rivers, the information is less valuable because you don't get to the river that often, but it's the planning and the comfort level that it gives you in previous streets. And Yasser Sarouan, who I do commentary with, always likes to talk about a saying about studying the end game. It's like, cheating on an exam because you're going to get these questions.
Right. That's a beautiful way
if you study the end game, you are going to get these questions. 100%.
Yeah. Oh, it's such a beautiful quote. Yeah. Is poker beautiful? We talked about the beauty of chess. Do you think the game of poker is a beautiful game?
I do, but I think it's a little bit more of a stretch. Like, I think chess is really like almost like an art itself, or it can be considered an art. I think poker is a wonderful game, but it's a little bit more like a conversation than an art. But there are artistic elements to it, and I would say, like, to me, the most artistic thing in poker is actually equilibrium. I think that's kind of beautiful in a way. It kind of has that sense of checkmate and truth to me. And so I would say that's like the closest thing in terms of like the abstract feeling of beauty. What do you think? Because I think, it's first of all, I don't play PLO, so I feel like, or not well. So I think that I'm curious what a PLO player has to say about that question.
I never thought of this game as beautiful, to be honest, and I don't know if it is. The process of playing it for me is beautiful. This challenge, the mental challenge, like if I look at the length of the session, the flow of the session, where is it going, what are we trying to achieve, etc., there's some beauty in that. Beauty within one particular hand, it's hard to find.
Yeah. Well, I think it's in that sense of like perfection and truth. And like it's harder to say that it exists in poker, but I feel like in a single moment it does exist. It certainly exists in terms of like pure equilibrium play. And that's why sometimes when I'm studying, I get that sense of beauty, like if I was studying a chess study. But I think even like people who are exploitative players can sometimes get that feeling of complete truth, even if it's like a little bit of a mirage, even if it's only like, it's not really 100% truth, but it has that feeling and like just like that flow experience of playing well and feeling like for once in a rare, session, like you just have all of the answers and all of the variables are kind of like, clear in your head. That just that mental imagery, but it's more of a stretch. I mean, you have to define beauty more broadly to define it as such. I think it's almost like more of like a flow experience and a feeling of puzzle solving. It wouldn't be as common of a definition of beauty, but I think it is.
But also, I'm trying to think about what you just said in terms of the equilibrium is beautiful. Is it? Is the equilibrium beautiful?
Because if I think so. Sometimes, because it's especially when it's surprising. I guess this goes back to the chess, the paradox. Yeah.
Because sometimes maybe there's more paradox in playing the player, so to say. That there's more beauty in some sense when you understand the situation on a deeper level, and you sort of read their soul. Maybe there's more beauty in that for me, because in the equilibrium, in chess, the paradoxical move reveals something unexpected and leads somewhere where you don't expect to arrive. with an equilibrium, if we think about what game theory achieves, well, it only achieves that you're not exploitable. That no matter what your opponent does, they can't improve their win rate against you. They can only make it worse. But it doesn't guarantee the highest win rate for you. It doesn't guarantee that you always make the correct play. You just, you make the plays in such a way where it's irrelevant what the opponent does. I don't know if I see beauty in that.
Yeah, maybe it's because of that chess thing, because of like the truth. Like, because I think a lot of chess players approach poker from that kind of like truth finding point of view, and I find that enticing. I don't know, but I poker's greatest strengths is its ability to make us understand ourselves better.
Oh yeah,
and to understand other people better, I think. And then like some of this stuff is more of like, icing on the cake, or, somewhat related to it.
Yeah, it definitely does bring out or expose certain character traits and qualities, and it's a beautiful game for that. To know yourself better and to get to know others better as well. Let's talk a bit about the grid. You've mentioned your podcast. It won the prize for the best poker podcast this year, right?
Yes, that's right. It was amazing. Right. Actually, it was early March. It was right before I stopped leaving my house, basically.
Okay.
And no, I am leaving my house a little, but not really doing any traveling since then. So yeah, that was really amazing. I was just happy it resonated with people because there's so many great poker podcasts. So it was a tremendous honor to win, honestly. And yeah, I like that people enjoy the concept because I've had a lot of weird ideas for my life, and sometimes they don't really resonate with people. They resonate with me, but not necessarily with other people. And my husband also thought that this was a winner and ended up producing it. And I just was very stoked that other people really liked it. I mean, we put a lot of effort into it. Like, I think that we do a lot of editing and production because we have to like find a hand that is memorable to each guest. And then kind of like we use that as a window into their overall career and approach to poker. So we start with a specific and then we move to the general, which I've always liked as a writer, because it guarantees that I'm going to get some stories in there. So yeah, I like the concept, and I'm glad that other people liked it too.
Oh, it's absolutely wonderful. I recently started listening to that, and now it's basically on my list of. I listen to a lot of podcasts throughout the week, and yours is the only poker podcast so far. Wow, so far, I haven't found any other that I'm interested in. And at first, I was also a bit. I don't want to say skeptical because I wasn't skeptical, but I don't know the word I'm looking for. But anyway, the idea of you're going to talk about a hand in the beginning, I found it like, really, is it going to be interesting? And it's great because it really, because obviously people prepare and they bring the story behind the hand in such a beautiful way. And yeah, it's absolutely wonderful. I was surprised just how well the idea works, and it's beautiful. And also, talk about beautiful, it's the grid, it's it has the geometry to it, and also the sort of growing anticipation. Okay, so who's going to take that combination, because you're running out of the spaces on the grid at some point. The good ones are taken, the easy ones are taken, so there's going to be more and more surprises along the way.
Yeah, I know. It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. I might have to branch out to PLO where like, if the hand is the two cards in your hand is the one, like that counts. I think I'm going to do that at least once because I think it'd be a nice twist. I mean, it is 169 episodes. So, but the problem is like, I think that it's going to be hard to get trash hands with that, right? Unless it's like heads up PLO. Like you guys are going to be probably, if I got PLO players, it would be mostly like the better hands overall, right? In terms of like memorable hands.
I don't know. I mean, we have all sorts of hands eventually. We don't necessarily think. I mean, I don't. It's hard to say because I'm weird in that way. I never focused on hand histories. I don't even remember some. I mean, I probably, if I really dig into it, I probably remember some hands, but I never focused on the hand. Like very often after the session, I have no clue. I don't remember any single
Yeah.
hand that I played. I do remember the concepts that I went through. I do remember that, oh, there was this situation where on such and such a flop, for example, such thing happened. You know, the notes about the other players, but the cards sort of become irrelevant at some point for me. And I hope that I'm not weird in that way, that it's mostly how other PLO players
Oh
also
yeah.
approach it. But
Oh yeah.
I don't know.
A lot of players are that way. A lot of players have struggled to come up with hand for it. And we have to, and that's like the reason why it's more difficult production wise. Sometimes
Yeah.
with certain guests, I'll help them look. Or sometimes, you know, there's a poker player who's a great player, but they don't have a good memory. So they like go through their notes. So yeah, it's going to be interesting as more and more of the grid gets filled out. But I'm having a really good time with it. And I think like something that I see in your podcast is that it's really nice to have a space to just have longer conversations where you're not distracted,
Oh, absolutely.
especially now, because it's like I'm not getting a chance to like go out to dinner with friends and to like meet them for drinks, because we've been pretty careful about the restrictions, because we can be. You know, I feel like we owe it. Like I work from home, I have a lot of online work, so I have the privilege to be pretty careful, and so you know that can help other people who can't because they need it for their livelihoods. But of course it's been a little difficult, but things like recording a podcast or some other types of social games that I play online are really an incredible solace, I think. And yeah, that my conversations are like usually 30 to an hour. Actually, I have to tell you, our original concept was 30 to 35 minutes.
Okay.
But then we started booking people like, you know, and I was like, I can't do it because if I manage to get this guest to like carve out time from their day and I'm only going to interview them for 30 minutes, it's just too painful for me because it's like once they get through the hand, that's going to be like 2 questions. So yeah, it kind of ended up becoming more of like 40 minutes to an hour. And I also heard somewhere that that's like a good podcast length because that's like a length of time that people like to work out. So I'm running with that.
Yeah. It's definitely a good length. Not something I've probably only had 2 episodes, which are only an hour. Mostly we go long.
That's good for people who are scheduling long workouts.
Exactly.
Everybody's got to lose that quarantine weight.
Healthy audience.
Yeah.
But also, you know, I look at it from my own perspective. I listen to a lot of podcasts because I'm just curious about a lot of things, and some of my favorite ones end up being these 4-hour, 5-hour episodes, which sort of intuitively you would say, oh, 5 hours, who's got time for that? But well, I listen at very high speed, so it's not the you know, it's close to 2x the speed. So if it is 4 hours, it ends up being 2 hours for me. And the more interesting episodes, I actually do listen twice. And if I find something that I didn't understand while listening at a very high speed, well, I just go back, put the speed down, listen to it again. And to me, that works. And I think for a lot of people, it's the same. So it's not really an investment of 2 hours, 3 hours for the audience. Some people actually, of course, listen at real speed, and then it is. But in many ways, podcast is just a conversation you eavesdrop on. It's not a full focus endeavor because mostly people listen while they commute, while they work out. It's not a full focus thing. So eventually, I guess it doesn't really matter if it's 1 hour, if it's 2 hours. But as a for you interviewing these people, of course, you'd like more than 35 minutes because it ends up being very short. Although I don't know if you've heard about Guy Raz, I believe is his name. He has, I really don't
How I
remember
Built This.
how I built
How I
this.
Built
Yeah,
This, yeah.
it's
Mhm.
beautiful. They do, I believe, 35 minutes. That's the sweet spot you were looking for initially, and they do a great job. There's a lot of editing there. They managed to squeeze in a bit of ads and still produce only 35-minute episode, and it's very interesting.
Yeah, yeah, I like that podcast. I've heard of him on other podcasts as well.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think that's interesting. So let me ask, what are your favorite podcasts? Like top
Mm,
3 or something?
top three. Okay. Well, I've been listening to Tim Ferriss' show for a
Hmm.
very long time, and it's still one of the favorites. I really like the work he does. Um, Lex Friedman, really interesting, especially the topics that he talks about are interesting to me personally. I like his style, and he talks very slowly, so at 2x the speed it's just perfect. He sounds like a normal good speed for me. But so yeah, Lex Friedman, I really enjoy his work. Lex Friedman, Tim Ferriss, and if I had to name the third, it's probably a list of like 7 that can hit the category of the third. Occasionally, it's going to be Joe Rogan when he has an interesting guest, and occasionally it's going to be Cal Fussman. Very good stuff there, and there's plenty. What about you? What are your favorites?
Well, I do like some poker podcasts. I listen to, well, the Chip Race. Those my
Hmm.
friends run that one, and then my Kara has the Heart of Poker. So I listen to those a lot when I'm working out
Okay.
and I want an escape. My friend Ben has like the Premier Chess Podcast, the Perpetual Chess Podcast. So I
Hmm.
try to like find episodes from that a lot of the time, just because it helps with my work as well. And then outside like chess and poker, I often listen to. I like Ezra Klein a lot, actually. Ezra Klein podcast. I find that I don't I don't think he's not I like his political views. Like he
Hmm.
definitely is pretty far on the left on a lot of issues, but he also is centrist on some issues. So I find him like, or more centrist on some issues. So I find I like listening to him because I feel like I often get both sides of issues, even if he is more on the left.
Hmm.
So I really enjoy listening to his show. So the only problem is sometimes it's like too serious. Like sometimes you want to listen to a podcast for an escape, and if you listen to like politics, it's hard. I think one of the best produced podcasts I've ever heard is Planet Money. I think it has like
Yeah.
some of the best writers in production in any podcast I've ever heard because like one time they did a poker show and like I just couldn't believe how they nailed the accuracy. They didn't make like one mistake, it seemed. And they really kind of they were the episode was about explaining backing in poker.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. And you would expect that like a lot of times these mainstream shows, they get like a few type of details wrong, but no, they really
Mm.
nailed it. And it's like the opposite of the Gel Man effect, which is that if you are a big fan of like a newspaper or a podcast and then you hear them talk about your own industry and they just
Mm.
mess everything up,
Yeah.
it kind of casts doubt on everything else they've done. Because you're like, well, if they messed up my industry, then maybe all this stuff I learned in the other stuff is wrong. So when I heard
Absolutely.
that episode about poker and like, a more complicated insider world in poker of backing, I was like, well, that means that like I can maybe trust their other
Mm.
episodes even more. And so I probably listen to that one the most. They're very short though, like
Mhm.
20 minutes long. So, but yeah, that's probably like almost number one.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that one. I like that one as well. And in general, the shows that are as the ones that I've mentioned are basically the long form conversation ones where it's just a conversation. The ones which are with more prep and more topical and more to the point, like true journalistic work, there's an abundance of them as well, and they're so great. Like the Planet Money that you've mentioned, or the Freakonomics Radio, or Malcolm Gladwell has his revisionist history show, which is most of it is incredible. Some of it is dubious, but I love his work in general. But speaking about your podcast, what were, for you personally, some of the more surprising things, the more interesting things that you've learned from your guests?
Let me think about that for a minute. Well, what are the interesting things I learned from my guests? Let me try to think about who I've had on recently. Well, I recently had Linda Johnson on, and she is such a legendary person that was a real privilege. And hearing about how much success she's had in the business of poker was really inspiring. And she talked about this first female world champion of poker, Vera Richmond, which was such a mind bender because, the first female world champion in chess was also Vera Menchik.
Okay.
So that's an astonishing coincidence. And I really loved hearing from her about that. And apparently, Vera was not a very nice person, the poker player. The chess person was a great person. But Linda talks about how she still supported her in terms of getting her name in the record books because, there's that integrity that you have to do what's right, regardless of how you feel about a person. So I thought that was really valuable. Michael Acevedo. Actually, that was just one of my favorite episodes because I like poker theory. So I love that episode. And then Mandy Baker did say something that surprised me about, she had a deep run at a World Poker Tour ages ago. Oh God, how long was it ago? 15 years ago, I think, in 2005. And she had a very deep run at a World Poker Tour in Foxwoods. And that was actually a World Poker Tour event that Nick Schulman won when he was very young. I think he was 21 or maybe I think he was the youngest person to win a WPT at that point. I think he was close to the minimum age. And Mandy was telling me how she was it was particularly bitter for her to lose because she had some critical hands against Nick. And, she was obviously very young at the time too, maybe a couple years older. And it was if it was going to be a super young person, she wanted it to be her. And I love that because I feel like women too often compare themselves with each other. So the idea that she was comparing herself to a man, I think is, that it makes sense because she was a very ambitious player and there weren't a lot of women playing at that time. But I also think it was cool, that she expressed that publicly, because there's so much truth in that, especially when we're young, that people, a lot of their motivation sometimes comes from comparing themselves with their peers. And sometimes there can be some negativity into it in the moment, but I think overall it's a positive. So you can be friends with somebody and jealous of their success in the short term, but in the long term, it's because you have so much respect for them.
It's interesting because it is a big driver for, well, a lot of competitive people in poker, in chess, this comparing yourself to others and striving to something. Do you think it's a prerequisite, or what are your thoughts on that?
I don't think it's a prerequisite. I think it's some people are like that. And it can be difficult to deal with. You got to use it and figure out how to control it and not let it take over and hurt your relationships. But also accept that sometimes, you wish part of being friends with great people is that sometimes when they succeed, you feel oh, that could have been me. And that's the point. That's why you're friends with them, because you want them to do great things. And even if sometimes in some dark moments, you feel more jealous and happiness, if you think about it more globally, it's because that's why you wanted to be friends with them in many ways, because you wanted them to succeed. It's just in the moment, it might feel bad because you wanted it too. But I think if you take a more bigger picture look at it, you'll see that it was what you wanted all along, because that's what kind of brings you up, being friends and having contacts who do great things. So give yourself some credit. And another surprising thing though for me was Bill Perkins, who was on my podcast, and he said that he thought Dan Blazarian could beat Magnus Carlsen with Magnus having 30 seconds on the clock and Dan having 10 minutes. And I was very surprised by that. That's a very specific example.
Okay. What do you think? Does he have a chance?
No.
I mean, it's weird. Bill sometimes comes up with interesting lines to bet on, but well.
Yeah. I think so. Obviously, he's got a great platform. Value with Zero. I know you interviewed him recently as well. He's a pleasure to talk to because he says what he thinks. Yeah. But yeah. That's a good question though. Like, what's most surprising? That's always a really good one. I think like it's because you kind of look at things from a different angle, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you should be like. And that's one of the reasons I did the grid, because I feel like it's not clear whether I'll finish it. My goal is to. But I think that makes it more interesting that there's some tension. Like if I told you ahead of time that I have every single cell in the grid pre-planned and I know I'm going to do all the interviews, it would be a little bit less interesting. It's like a movie where you know what the ending is going to be. I think that part of the intrigue for me is I don't know how it's going to end. If I finish it, I might do some kind of like different experiments toward the end of it. Or maybe I don't finish it. I don't know. I know that one of the ideas that inspired this project was an artist in China. He was studying in China at the time, and he saw a lot of discarded playing cards on the ground. And so he started taking like portraits of them, like photographs. And I think a lot of this was like superstition that like there were high stakes games and people would just like throw out an unlucky card and like just abandon it.
Okay.
And yeah, at some point you have this mathematical, quandary that as you, click off a lot of these hands, he was trying to get a 52 card deck. So he's trying to get all the 52 cards. And at some point, he had to leave China and he didn't finish the project, or he stopped the project for some reason. And, it's because there's this coupon collector's fallacy, or no, it's a coupon collector's problem. Not fallacy, but it's like a mathematical formula to show you like how many more iterations you need as you get towards the end, right? Mm-hmm. Because I on stream once I tried to play a session where I clicked off every hand on the grid, and then some mathematical people in the chat were trying to calculate on average how long would I have to play in order to reach all 169 hands. Mm-hmm. And I was playing like sit and goes. Okay. So
how long would it be?
I think we came up with something like 12 hours. We came up with something like 12 hours, and I was playing like 2 6-max sit and goes, or maybe something at once, maybe 3. I think I was playing 3 6-max sit and goes while streaming. And then the idea is that you get heads up a lot. So once you get heads up, you start getting all the trash hands, right? So yeah, we came up with something like 12 to 13 hours. But there's variation in that. I think that was like the average.
Yeah.
Or the median. I can't remember which, but yeah, it was fascinating how they were like kind of attacking this math problem. And I looked it up later, and they were talking about like the coupon collector's problem. Mm-hmm. And from the very beginning, like I did not study advanced math, but when I worked on open-faced Chinese poker, and particularly I was making a lot of run-at-once videos for like 5-6 years ago, I had to learn some math by scratch because nobody was really doing math on that game yet. So Bill Chen, my friend, helped me with some things, but there were some things that I really wanted to understand myself. So I was like looking up like, college or high school math videos on like combinatorics and stuff like that. And I realized at some point I want to do that for the grid too, like with the coupon collectors thing, because anytime you can like train yourself to learn math as a grown-up, it's pretty impressive because we have so many ways to avoid trying to study math. Yeah. But it's like a superpower, one of my regrets in life is not studying math when I was in college.
David Sklansky is going to have a book out on math. He just finished the book about probabilities. It's called something along the lines, all you need to know about probability, or I don't know. Anyway, it's like he's trying to explain the probabilities to a 12-year-old. That's the gist of it. And he's doing the same with the math book. It's coming out, I guess, next year. And to me,
Cool.
that was
Well,
surprising. The conversation with him when he is talking exactly about the thing that you were just mentioning when you were studying the math for the open face Chinese. Uh, and he just sees math everywhere because he's very logical in his thinking in general and a brilliant mathematician. So he always saw the math around him, and it was to his great advantage, obviously, in those days in poker.
yeah, it's a superpower, math. I mean, I think it's just extraordinary, and I wish I learned it more when I was a kid, but there's also something cool about learning it when you're older because like usually you have a very specific goal in mind. Like um I think was it in Black Swan or Fooled by Randomness? I think there was a section about how if there was a way to make money from learning math, suddenly suddenly things unlocked and like, the brain that you didn't think would be as suited to learning it became very, very proficient.
Yeah. Yeah. When you came up with an idea of the grid, once you started doing it, is it going the way you imagined, or were there some surprising things that you didn't expect?
Well, I think it's going to be a little harder than I expected because I guess one thing that was a little bit disappointing, even though I'm actually thrilled with how the project is going. I mean, the fact that we won the award in the first year means like so much to me, and we've gotten so many great guests. But people wanted more good hands than I expected. I was kind of hoping that like the really good players would all want like trash hands from like a heads up battle. But the thing is, generally, like hands that are interesting, like probably the most interesting hand in poker is like Ace King, in No Limit Hold'em, because everybody has like so many hands because you're always playing Ace King and you're always getting to the flop with it, or if it's a deep stack situation, you're never like folding it pre-flop really. So you have so many iterations with Ace King, or aces maybe too. People have a lot of interesting hands with aces, but I bet you if you like collectively polled poker players with No Limit Hold'em, like about their most interesting and memorable hand, like Ace King would probably be the winner, I think. So that is a challenge because only one person gets to pick Ace King. And actually we haven't clicked it off yet because I want it to be like a really special hand that kind of like takes all of that into account. And you could say that about some other hands too, like Ace Queen or aces. I was trying to use a one that was not unpaired because combinatorically it's obviously much more common. But yeah, those hands are just so popular, and I want to avoid a situation where I have all of the premium hands clicked off, and then if I get like a celebrity on who doesn't play any hands really, and needs to talk about Ace King or Jacks because they've only played like a few hundred hands lifetime, I don't want to like not be able to have that celebrity on anymore because all of them have already been clicked off. So I guess that's like a even bigger challenge than I thought it would be. And I think what it means for me is I just have to do more production work. So rather than like ask somebody what hand they want to cover, I need to like start finding more hands and just asking them, will you talk about this hand? Which means like, looking over footage and stuff.
Yeah, it means more work, but how do you actually choose your guests? How do you go about it?
Well, when I advertised like a year and a half ago that the podcast was launching, a lot of people messaged me about their hands. So I created a spreadsheet and I just started putting in names. And like, so even though we've only had like, by the time this is out, maybe 50 or 52 episodes, I'm not sure exactly when this is coming out, but around 50. And yet there's like more like 100 on the grid in my Excel spreadsheet. So there's almost, maybe not 100, maybe more like 80 or 90, but there's almost double that in terms of people who've told me they want to talk about a hand, and we just haven't gotten to it yet.
Who would you really want to have on? Like,
Um,
let's talk about the hard to get guest or the unlikely guest, like the aspiration. What is your aspiration for whatever reason? Not only because they might be hard to reach, but also because they might be not willing to talk or something like that. I don't know. Do you have some aspirational goal?
yeah, Barack Obama.
Really? That's a great choice. Wouldn't that be awesome? That'd
No,
be
apparently he
awesome.
liked to play poker. He liked to play poker, and I heard that he was quite tight. So I have to save Ace King for him because
Wow. I love
I'm sure he
that.
has an interesting
I
hand with
love
Ace
that.
King.
Oh wow.
I heard. There's been a couple articles sprinkled throughout the times, but I can't. I think it might have been the New Yorker. It was many, many years ago, before he was president. I think even they did like
Mhm.
there was like a paragraph about his poker skills, about how he was good and he was on the tighter side. And then, yeah, that would be amazing. And of course, the obvious answer is like Phil Ivey. That would
Mhm.
be great because he doesn't do a lot of interviews, so he'd be amazing. As would all of the usual suspects who don't do a ton of interviews. Doyle Brunson would be amazing.
Oh, it
I
would
would
be amazing.
imagine. I have the 10 deuce off reserved for him just in case.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, I met him before and he was really nice to me, but again, he doesn't do a lot of interviews. But one of the saddest things about having a project like this is seeing people die, and it's just so concrete. You realize that you have limited time in this world to connect with people, and podcasting is a way to connect with people. And
Mm.
like it just breaks your heart when you see these legends of the game. And that's why we need to make sure not to just focus on like what's like the highest stakes, youngest, richest person right now, but like all this work is also about preserving and recording, I think. And so that's one thing I noticed, that in the beginning of the grid I was mostly going through like my own personal contacts. So a lot of people in their like anywhere from their like late 20s to like 40s, right?
Mhm.
And I didn't have a lot of very young people or older people, right? So later I've been kind of conscious of that I want to, kind of like reach everyone, not just my personal contacts. It makes it more challenging because
Mhm.
people get a lot of requests, and as much as they'd like to be on the grid, a lot of people want to be on the grid, but it's also a little bit more work for the guests because they also have to come up with a hand
Mhm.
and remember it and remember the details. So it's more challenging, but I think it's important, especially in terms of getting the older people, because this is like a in some ways like a quilt, like 169 hand creation. And if you don't have enough historical voices in it, it's not as powerful.
Mhm. No, it's true. It's such a beautiful idea what you're building. The what's the word? The fact that it's finite, the actual grid, the boundaries of it, that it's only going to be this, the 169. I find that it's really beautiful, but also it puts a lot of pressure on you because you have to give every cell justice. There's a certain requirement for the quality, which is great for your audience because they know that they can expect some really interesting stuff. So either way,
Yeah.
a tough project
Although,
and so interesting.
thank you. I love that you like it. I like it when people see things in it and it makes them excited, like that it gives them like, ideas, or that they're intrigued by it. Some people are in it for the interviews, but some people are kind of interested in that overarching concept. And I kind of like that it can work in both ways. Um, yeah, but also like of course some hands are less interesting than others, and that's totally okay. That's why I find like as an interviewer, and you're a really good interviewer, so I'm sure you've noticed this as well as you've gotten more and more into podcasting, that like my goal is to find out what a guest is most passionate about and what they have most to say about, and kind of try to like steer the conversation towards that. So like
Hmm.
if I have, Chris Kroc or Sam Greenwood on, they're so brilliant on poker theory. I want to kind of stay on that topic for a little while. I don't want to like move because I know people want to hear about it and I want to hear about it.
Hmm.
Although of course I have lots of other interesting things to talk about, like that is like something that my guests really want to hear about. But then there's sometimes people who are professional writers and poker is like a sideline for them. Then we might go through the hand a little more quickly and spend the bulk of the conversation on their passion and their work. And I try to keep that in mind always, like that you're kind of like just poking around, looking for something that's going to light up somebody's brain.
And it's so beautiful in a sense that there's this underlying thread of the poker hand with every single guest, but their personal interests and where the conversation goes depends on them. And it just goes to show that there's so many people playing poker, people from so many walks of life. Apparently Barack Obama, I didn't know that, but it's amazing. I'm so glad to find that out. And that's one of the things that makes poker beautiful. We talked about beauty of poker and couldn't find a definitive answer, but maybe that's one of the beautiful things about poker, because in chess you have to be a certain level before you can start enjoying the game, truly enjoying the game. Whereas in poker, you can be absolute loser, still have fun. As long as you treat it as, let's say, well, you pay for playing golf. Well, now you're playing playing poker.
Yeah, I agree. Wait, but the first part of what you said, that if you're a chess player, you can't, you don't think? I think you can. You just have to like find, maybe you can work on puzzles. I think that's important. Like one of the things I like that the training sites in chess now are doing is they have like puzzle ratings and puzzle contests. Because then you're just competing against yourself, and you can always beat your own high score, and that's an achievement, rather than like, getting like crushed by your friend who's like hundreds of points higher rated than you. That might take like a year to get to approach that. But you can always beat your score in like puzzles or endgame drills. And I don't know, I find it very satisfying. I mean, I kind of burn out on Puzzle Rush, but like many other people, I was like completely obsessed with it for a couple months. And, it feels really good to beat your high score, right?
Well, absolutely. Puzzles are amazing. Puzzles are so great. And puzzles are such a beautiful metaphor for the game as well, because I keep telling and I keep bringing up this comparison to my students, and otherwise when I'm talking about poker, if you think about it, when you're solving a puzzle, you might be very good at solving puzzles, but when you're in the puzzle section, you're solving a puzzle. You know that, hey, there's a move, there's this paradoxical move here somewhere, I'm trying to find a little something. But in game, put the same situation in game, you arrive at that same situation somehow naturally. Alarm bells are not ringing. You're not feeling, oh my God, there's a tactic here. Once you're at the very high level, those alarm bells are ringing all the time because of the pattern recognition. You start seeing, okay, well, there's something, there's imbalance here, I could create something, etc., etc. But it's easy for a mediocre player to become very good at puzzle solving and learn a lot about puzzle solving from that. Doesn't necessarily improve their chess all that much. It does, of course, but it doesn't translate one for one.
Not one for one. I mean, when you start out though, it's like if you haven't done a lot of it, it'll help a lot. If you've already done a lot, it won't help as much. That I think is a key thing in chess. Like you get diminishing returns if you do the same thing over and over again. My friend who's a great champion, Irina Crush, and even my brother, Greg Shahade, who talks about this in terms of his US chess school, which surprises me because my brother is such a like online person. He's like, really good with tech and, different improvement tools. But both of them have reported to me that they think that it's important for people to occasionally switch to books, even kids, from like just solving things online, because of the fact that like your brain just like works in a different way when you're looking at it on a board and pieces or on a book. It's just like kind of like reframing it so that like it sticks in some part of your brain that it wasn't necessarily.
Right. What do you think about solving the games or playing the games in your head? No board, no visuals at all.
Yeah, I'm not it's hard. It's hard. It's very difficult. And the question is whether it's a good hard or if it's just like a painful hard. And I think it depends. I mean, it's definitely like every good player is going to be decent at blindfold chess, but I also think it's okay if you don't like it that much because there's so many other ways to train. Like obviously you want to get good enough at blindfold chess that you can read a book, and even if there's only sparse diagrams, you can like read it easily because that's like an important skill to have.
Mm-hmm.
But do you need to be able to play like 10 people at once while blindfolded? Not really. I mean, that might impress your friends and it might be something that you could sell as a corporate event, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be like something that will improve your game directly.
Although, if we think about it from a different perspective, that it enables you to work on your game in settings where you otherwise can't, because you can't bring out the chessboard everywhere. I mean, obviously nowadays we just pick out our phone and then it's all there, and so it's a sort of not really important. But back in the day, I guess the people who were able to just see a position and play the position over and over again in their head, they had an advantage because all of a sudden, you're in a bus, you're on a walk, wherever you are, you're working productively on the
That's
game.
true. Yeah, that is true. Yeah, I mean, you definitely have to like have some blindfold skills, but it's not like you have to torture yourself if you don't like it. It's very difficult. I barely have done any blindfold exhibitions in my life, and when I did one, it was because I was pregnant. And I thought that it would be a great flyer, blindfold and pregnant.
Mm-hmm. But wait a minute.
I did a few actually. I've done a few exhibitions, but not a lot.
Didn't you also win a poker tournament when you were pregnant?
I came second at one. I had a good year when I was pregnant, though.
You had a good year by the sound of it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I had a lot of success in poker that year. Yeah, of course I had a good year. Actually, though, that's not, in a way, it's not true because my son was actually born in January 3rd. So the previous year was also great, but it was actually like the next year when he was born. He was right on that bubble of 2016 and 2017.
The bubble.
Mm-hmm.
That's nice. Yeah. All right. Jennifer, you know what? I really enjoyed this, and I know that we went a bit longer than we planned initially. Let's wrap it up. Just a final question, perhaps, is what is your hope with the grid? What do you hope that it brings to the poker community?
Well, I hope it brings this kind of idea that art and stories are not in contrast to math and analytical thinking, but it's all part of the same culture. So that's the idea that this is like a kind of a merging of the mathematical representation of all poker hands, which people think of as, very analytical, and sometimes they even, say negative things about it, like robotic or nerdy. But this mathematical part, which I find very beautiful, is like in concert with the human side of the game, which is like all the stories and human memories that we create from devoting ourselves to the game and its study and practice.
It's very interesting because it also puts the grid, the hands, in a sort of perspective, adds the human aspect to it, because now you can put a face on the chart and feel that eventually we're playing a game which is a social game in its beginnings. It's hard to see that this way online, but whenever you're playing, whether it's in your home game, casino with your friends, etc., predominantly it's just a social endeavor.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that. I love that because we can't lose either. And, when I came into the project, I feel like even a year and a half ago, people were less sold on like the mathematical aspect of the game.
Mm-hmm.
And so the grid was also kind of like a statement that the analytical side was not boring or, soulless. But I think people have mostly come around on that. Like they understand that this is important for understanding poker. But the other side, not losing that like social fun element, and not seeing them as at war with each other, even though obviously in some contexts they could be,
Mhm.
but they don't have to be.
Oh well, once again, the beauty of the games and the aesthetics of it, the beauty of the math in poker, the beauty of the social aspect in poker. And once again, thank you so much for leading me on to the Queen's Gambit. That's I usually don't watch much TV. I don't even remember was the last series. Actually, I do remember the last series I watched was True Detective. Actually the second one. So that's years ago. Is the last time I watched a series, and now I'm in a deep dive in the Queen's Gambit. Really enjoying it. Of course, I'll put all the links to everything what we talked about today in the show notes, so people can find your webpage, the grid. If they're interested in the chess stuff, there's plenty of things that you're doing there as well, and they'll be able to find that all.
Great. Thank you so much. You're such a good interviewer, and I'm so glad that you're doing this. And thank you to everybody for watching or listening.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate it. And thanks for making the time. Thanks for coming on. I hope we have maybe another conversation with you at some point. I don't have the grid, so I can invite you over and over again. It's much
Maybe
easier.
in 2 years when I finish it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm playing, because I'm gonna follow your project with huge interest now, especially now that I know that there is a slight chance, a tiny chance, that Barack Obama is coming on the show. I'm gonna wait for that. It would be, honestly, it would be a beautiful, beautiful thing for poker if we think about how much good has the Queen's Gambit done for the chess world. Barack Obama coming on your podcast, I mean, it's gotta be up there. At least
I'm
on the
booking it
same
any
level.
day now. Any day now.
Yeah. that would be amazing. I really hope that happens. But either way, I'm going to be following and listening to your podcast, and I hope that the grid does fill in to the last cell. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Check out the description, and of course, I'd highly appreciate if you subscribe, click like, spread the word about the podcast. Also, if you'd like to receive a regular newsletter with my key takeaways about each episode, go ahead and subscribe to it on runchukspodcast.com. That's RUNCHUKS podcast.com. I write those myself, I take it seriously, and I really enjoy the interaction with the readers, so I hope you'll sign up, and I'll be back for you next time. Thank you.